Our story starts with a knock on the door. The door was later open, and two officers shows up. They inform the young Don-gu that his parents had passed away during a recent research project. He will also be transferred to an orphanage since he doesn't have any known relatives. The officer then adds that Don will be given a settlement of $5 million when he turns 18. They then hand him the documents, before the young boy signs it with teardrops falling onto the paper. After the procedure was complete, the two men said their goodbyes before leaving. After closing the door, Don was overwhelmed with emotions. His older self wanted to comfort him, but the young boy suddenly hugs his future counterpart and requests him to keep his promise of becoming a doctor. Don then wakes up from his nightmare screaming. He afterwards suffers a vicious headache and quickly looks for his medication, knocking a piece of paper onto the floor in the process. But a closer look at the paper shows that Don is currently diagnosed with malignant brain stem tumor. Don then grabs a pack of cigarette to smoke. Unfortunately, the carton was already empty, so Don could only gaze at the beautiful sea in discomfort. It's then revealed that Don is currently on a cruise ship, and we quickly learn he is now 21 years old, 11 years later after his parents disappeared in their science field trip. And while this incident did leave a big scar on him, Don would continue to work hard, and he was later accepted into one of the best medical school. However, on the day he gave a speech at the orientation ceremony, Don-gu proclaims there was only one kind of patients in this world, and those were the poor. These remarks influenced him too much, and he would spend most of his college days partying, leading him to fail all of his exams. But 6 months ago, Don learns he was diagnosed. So he went to see many doctors for a different result, but in the end the outcomes were all the same. At that moment the rich and arrogant Don died, replaced by the real Don-gu who was humble and only have a few months left to live. So Don decided to travel to the DLK volcanic belt in the Indian Ocean, because he wanted answers at the place where his mom and dad disappeared. An attendant then notifies him that his submarine trip was ready. She also comments that the captain has something to say to him. The attendant later guided Don towards the submarine. As they had arrived at the place, the captain cheerfully greets Don and apologizes since he knows Don had already booked for a solo trip, but this people also wanted to come and he was told to not offend them. Michelle then offers Don more money to leave the trip, but Don expressed they can either share the submarine or her group can wait for the next dive. Michelle immediately got angry, but her friend Jerry calms her down and apologizes to Don. So as the crew hurriedly entered the submarine, they quickly made their way down to the depths of the ocean, while Jerry and his gangs were enjoying the spectacles and recording videos on their phone. Don remembers this was where his parents' ship was last seen. He then spots something that surprises him. It was a mysterious obelisk with some kind of script on it. The obelisk suddenly starts to emit red light, and lava came pouring out of it. All of a sudden Don starts to have a serious headache, and he would close his eyes to alleviate the pain. But when he opened his eyes again, he saw disturbing images of monsters being stitched together, and a Lovecraftian monster destroying civilization. Back at the outside world, the captain quickly alerts them to wear their seatbelt because there was an undercurrent vortex ahead. The vortex then hits the submarine, causing the ship to shake violently, and Jerry, who didn't wear his seatbelt in time, was sent flying towards Don. But back inside of Don-gu's mind, the obelisk was connecting itself with Don like a game system. It even shows information about the young lad, and informs him that he will only have 2 months left to live due to the rapidly growing brain tumor. Don felt like giving up when he heard this, but he suddenly triggers a quest list, and the system explains the host could do quests to receive rewards. Quests are also divided into 3 levels. They were normal, hard, and abyssal, but he could only choose one at a time, and the quest list will refresh every 24 hours. Don was intrigued with the normal quest, because the reward was a drug that can extend his life for 5 days. Suddenly the obelisk presented him with a beginner's pack. An array of light was shot out of it, quickly transforming into a Lovecraftian beginner's pack. Although Don was afraid of it, he still tried to touch it. The creature then latches itself onto him, and sprayed hot liquid on his hands, melting his skin as a result. Don would then collapse from the pain. When he wakes up, he saw that the beginner's pack had shriveled up. His hands were now different. The obelisk explains he has received the ability called Calm Hands, which gives the user the hands of a skilled surgeon when it's maxed out. Don then questioned if the reason he was chosen was because it's related to his parents' research. The obelisk ignores his question and requests him to choose a quest. But since most of the quests were impossible to fulfill in his current situation, like how the abyssal quest wants him to dissect a ghoul within a week, Don asked if he could accept the quest later. The system says he could do that by just activating the system interface in his head to come back. Don then felt like his head was going to split, and he suddenly returns back to reality. Currently, Jerry was flung towards him, and his elbow rammed into Don's seat. causing him to flip in another direction. Don would quickly react and grab onto Jerry's shirt before pulling him in closer and holding him tightly. The captain then tells everyone to hold on tightly, while Michelle hurriedly alerts them of the strange phenomenon happening outside. Don was surprised when he saw it, because the fish were acting like they were in some kind of cult. Fortunately, they managed to escape the vortex, and Jerry thanks Don for saving him. However, his arm was now badly injured, with blood oozing out of it. His crew then worriedly came to check on him. Don asked if Jerry was feeling any nausea or headache. Jerry replied only his arm was hurting, so Don assured him he'll be fine, before revealing he's a medical student and requests someone to immediately bring him a first aid kit. Don then realized the situation met all the criteria to complete the normal quest, so he went back inside his mind, and the normal quest wanted him to save an emergency patient within a day. Don clicked accept, and the captain brought him the medical kit. However, Jerry was starting to lose consciousness from blood loss, so Don advises him to do whatever it takes to stay awake. Jerry would blab about being a streamer and how he's a massive foodie. Don would take this time to inspect Jerry's injury, and found he had an open fracture wound in the forearm. Don would use his new skill Calm Hands to swiftly stop the blood flow with the tourniquet, before bandaging the wound up and making a handmade cast for Jerry. Jerry once again thanks Don for saving his life, but Michelle questions why Don didn't fix his fracture directly. Don explained equipment, otherwise he'll just make it worse. Michelle went silent when she heard this. Jerry then exclaims where was his phone. Don noticed it near his feet, so he bends over to pick it up, but Michelle would snatched it from his hand. However, the phone seems to be wasted because they couldn't turn it on. Jerry was disappointed since he risked his life shooting that footage. Don then hurriedly inquires if Jerry saw anything. Jerry expressed he was thrown away before he could spot anything. Don instantly calmed down when he heard this. A short while later, Derek tells everybody to look up, because they were now nearing the surface. 15 minutes later, an emergency doctor tells Don that they'll be taking Jerry to a nearby hospital in the Maldives for surgery. Jerry says they'll contact Don when he gets better, and Don salutes him in response. As Don was leaving for his room, Michelle lets out a grateful smile while gazing at Don. On his way back to his room, the system shows that the normal quest is now complete. Don then felt something in his inner pocket. It was a pack of pills. Later that night in Don's room, Don was inspecting the pills, and was intrigued by the strange language and logo from behind. He wonders if there was really such a monster in this world. Suddenly his head starts to hurt, and the system reveals the new quest list for today. Don thought the new normal quest was more doable than the previous one, since he just needs to practice pricking a rubber tourniquet with a needle 1,000 times. Don afterwards calls the infirmary for the materials. 2 hours later, Don had completed another normal quest. The mastery of Calm Hands went up, and he receives another packet of pills in his pocket. Don takes out the packet and thought about popping a pill. However, he stops at the last second, because taking an unknown pill with strange writing was just too risky for him. He also thinks the system might be a devil that could manipulate him with the rewards. So Don decided to call an old friend and ask him for a bit of help. 3 days later at East Medical School, Sean ran so fast to greet Don that he was now gasping for air. Don then asked if he prepared the materials, and Sean confirms that he did, but worriedly questions if Don was trying to commit suicide. So as the two friends made their way inside the laboratory, Sean explains there were all kinds of evil rumors about Don when he was away, and since the material he requested could only harm humans, it was natural to think Don might end himself. However, Don replied those were all just baseless rumors. Sean then shows the brainstem glioma cells that Don asked for. Don was impressed at how fast the cells were progressing during his 3 months absent. Sean reveals he has been cultivating it since summer for the upcoming national contest. Realizing Sean was bringing a malignant tumor project to the contest, Don asked him to show him the project. Don and Sean later arrives at another room. However, the people were surprised to see Don and were gossiping about him. Don tried to greet them, but Erica just ignores him and gives instructions to her team about creating a mouse's ascites-type tumor model. Don was pissed at Sean for bringing him here because Erica had once rejected his love confession. Erica then orders Sean to stop playing around and get to work. Sean in turn pleads with Erica to allow Don to study with them because he came back to sit for the exam. Erica agrees to Sean's request but warns Don to not mess around. The students then begins experimenting and researching, while Don stayed at the back observing them. Suddenly a classmate informs the group that the ascites in Mouse 4 has grown to the shape of a frog's belly. As everybody excitedly gather near the mouse, Erica says it's time to collect the ascites and start culturing tumor cells. Don then curiously asked what they were conducting. Sean stated they were researching photodynamic therapy for tumors, but since photosensitizers were expensive, Erica suggests they culture the cell and prepare more mouse tumors for experiments. Erica then got annoyed by their conversation and told the both of them to shut up. The two friends apologize for their bad behavior, and Erica would later prick the mouse with an IV needle before sucking the cells into the tube. However, at this moment, Don begins to have a headache again, and he starts seeing everything in red. The pain was also unbearable that he drops on his knees. As Don felt better and opens his eyes again, he was shocked by what he was seeing, because the lab had turned into a place resembling a slaughterhouse, with blood all over the place and mutilated corpses left and right. He then noticed an enigmatic writing on the wall painted with blood. At this moment, something just clicked inside of Don, and he begins chanting the words on the wall like he was possessed. What he said was, "The fruit of darkness grows from the eternal abyss, and the worms of death live long with the universe." When he came back to his senses, Don was confused on how he was reading the writings. Suddenly the writing began to drip more blood, and worms starts to spill out of vomit when witnessing this. Afterwards he realized the corpses were coming alive, and the corpse gave a deathly howl at Don, causing Don to go pale with fright. The corpses then begins to attack him. Fortunately, a second later, Don was brought back into reality by Sean. Yet Don was still so terrified at this moment that he accidentally destroyed a shelf and some plant pots. So after Don had calmed himself down a short while later, the groups asked if he was okay. Don nervously said he was fine, and as the group was about to comfort him some more, a strict voice told them to leave if they were just going to fool around. The students were surprised when they saw the owner of the voice, because the owner was Professor Gu, who questions why Don was here. Don nervously said he came back to take the exams again. However, Professor Gu remarks the research done here has nothing to do with the exams. Don then apologized before excusing himself. Yet Professor Gu would mock Don by saying that he was very talented at one time, but look at him now. This proves they don't have to be a genius when practicing medicine. What it takes is diligence. Professor Gu also reminds them to give their all in the upcoming contest, because a new group of medical talents will be selected. Later in the afternoon, a female classmate asks Sean why Professor Gu disliked Don. Sean explains that when Don almost got dropped out because he failed too many courses, it was Professor Gu who pleaded with the school to let him stay. Professor Gu then tells them to stop talking and focus on their work. Around the same time in another lab, Don had injected the mouse with tumor cells he'd gotten from Sean, and he'd split the mouse into two groups so he could test something out. The very next day in the student's dormitory, Sean had just came back from his morning, and when he entered his room, he'd noticed Don was fast asleep from studying. Sean picks up his book and comments that Don's been studying hard. He then remembers the day where they became brothers. It was around 2 years ago. Two bullies were bullying Sean for being bad at learning medicine, and they would mock and ridicule him to feed their pathetic ego. Don later overhears their conversation from behind and decided to take Sean out for a drink, while warning the bullies to never mess with Sean ever again. This was how Sean and Don became brothers. Sean then wished Don luck in his upcoming exam. Later that night inside of Lab 3, the mice in the two groups have all developed tumors. Don then wanted to test the pills out on the mouse to see the effects. So he pops one of the pills, took out the ingredients from the capsule, shoves all of it into a tube, before feeding the mouse with the medicine. Since Don had two groups of mice affected by tumors, he decided to dose the 3 mice in Group A with the mysterious medicine, while the 2 mice in Group B will be fed no medicine. On day 2, there were no abnormalities in both groups. However, on day 4, the mice in Group B were beginning to wilt, while the mice in Group A were still abnormalities. Finally, on day 7, the tumors in the mice of Group B were getting bigger and bigger that it was affecting their movements. Meanwhile, the tumors of the 3 mice in Group A did not grow and their movements were normal. Don concludes the medicine seems to be effective for stopping the tumor's growth, so it was time to try it out for himself. However, he decided to find a suitable place to take it in case something goes wrong. So the very next morning inside a hospital, Don takes out one of the pill, before quickly swallowing it without a second thought. He then prayed to his parents to keep him safe. Fast forward towards the evening, Sean has once again come back from his morning classes, but this time the room was completely empty. Don then appeared behind him looking like a starving ghost that was begging for food. This scared the living soul out of Sean, and he drops the grocery and parcel because of it. Sean later makes ramen for Don to eat. As Don continues to savor his ramen, Sean informs him that an international parcel has been delivered to him, and he hands the parcel over to Don. Don was shocked when he saw where it was sent from, because the parcel was delivered from the Maldives, the place where Jerry was taken to for his surgery. Don then opens the parcel, and he finds Jerry's phone inside. Don tried to turn on the phone, however the crack reveals it was still broken. So Don thought about learning how to fix the phone himself, and asked Jerry for the location of a nearby hardware store. Later at the CW hardware store, Don was leaving the shop after purchasing the tools he needs to fix the phone. As Don was walking back to his dormitory and learning how to repair a cell phone, he noticed someone was stalking him and turns around to see who it was. Don saw a shady-looking man that was smoking a cigarette. The shady-looking man could feel the intense stare of Don, so he turns around to avoid suspicion. This ultimately made Don stop suspecting the man. Later that night inside the dormitory, Don had just finished repairing the phone, and he was successful in turning it on. He then found the submarine video, and he starts to watch it. As the video reached the part where the underwater vortex had appeared, the following scene of the video had shocked Don to his core, because there was an old sunken ship at the depths of the ocean. Don recognized this ship to be Seabird, the ship which his parents were on when they disappeared. Suddenly the phone starts to shake because Jerry had dropped it. The video then shows what Don was doing while he was stuck in the system. He noticed something, but he couldn't hear what he was saying because the others were too noisy. The video then stops because the phone was broken. Don decided to rewind the video and turn up the volume so he could catch what he was saying. Don then hears himself chanting, "The fruit of darkness grows from the eternal abyss, and the worm of death lives long with the universe." Don immediately pulls the earphones out of his ears when he heard this, and he starts to realize something scary, because the writings he saw in his illusion had the same meaning. Don then went out for a quick smoke session to calm his nerves. It's revealed that Don has no knowledge about his parents' research. However, the company they work for, called Clason Tech, immediately shuts down after the Seabird's disappearance. Don thinks the research conducted by the Clason Tech must have something to do with the mysterious power at the DLK Ocean. Don then noticed the same shady man was stalking him again. The shady man saw Don looking at him, so he walks away to avoid suspicion. But Don now confirms he was being watched by a secret organization. So although the only lead he currently has is Clason Tech, he was determined to unravel the mysteries of the mysterious power and his parents' disappearance. Early in the next morning, Don had waken up Sean and said it's time to wake up, because they were the future medical workers who will heal this world. Later inside the lab's building, Sean asked if Don has finished reviewing for the exam. Don replied he was almost done. They then run into Erica, who was moving the mice box into the lab. Don greets her, and Erica greets Don back. Sean then suggests they help Erica carry the mice box. After putting away most of the mice box, Don noticed the shelf he'd destroyed had been repaired. He then wondered if he touched the illusion. Erica later questions why Don was going around and checking everything. Don apologized and says he'll help mark the mice to make up for it. The other students later arrives and greets them good morning. Don then shows himself to say hello. Although Johanna enthusiastically greets him back, the other two male students just ignores him. They later begin experimenting and researching. While Erica was hard at work, she noticed something has changed within Don. She thought he was more reliable now. Suddenly Professor Gu came rushing into the lab. Don tried to greet him, but Professor Gu would ignore him and tell everybody to stop what they're doing. He explains that the government will hold a citywide medical skill contest to select a group of young medical experts. Don realized the government must be hiding something for them to be in urgent need of medical experts. He also realized this might be his chance to uncover the truth if it's related to his parents' research. So Don begs Professor Gu to join the contest as well. But Professor Gu rejects his request before ridiculing him. The two male students would laugh at Don's misfortune, yet Erica would stand up for Don and ask Professor Gu to give Don a chance. Don was surprised that Erica was helping him, and since Erica was the one asking, Professor Don one more chance. He then informs everyone that the school has provided resources for them to practice dissection this afternoon. Since the new upcoming contest will require everyone to compete in dissection, Don thinks he'll need 500 more points to upgrade calm hands, so he can do his best to win the competition. Professor Gu then orders the four boys to get ready and go choose a body for dissection. Don was excited that he'll have a chance to dissect a deformed human body, because Don have never completed a hard or abyssal quest before, since they were practically impossible to find. But today he'll be able to dissect a deformed body and complete the hard quest. Professor Gu then shouts at Don to stop spacing out and go get ready. An hour later at the body storage building, the four medical students were shocked by what they were seeing, because the people delivering the bodies were wearing a protective chemical suit.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. If you want to see part 2 of this manhwa, make sure to comment on this video, and also if you want to know the name of this manhwa, you can see here. And also if you want to see more this kind of video, you can see here. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to see more exciting videos. Thank you everyone.